Who are some badasses in history that school didn't teach you about? King Sejong of ancient Korea was so tired of the Chinese-style writing, so he said this, and devised an entirely new form of writing that led to the modern Korean Hangul. Not the badass you all were probably thinking of, but the man was a genius for this. Gotta love an intellectual badass as well. Joe Medicine Crow was the last Native American to complete all 4 tasks required to become a war chief: taking an enemy's weapon, leading a successful war party, and stealing an enemy's horse. He did this during WW2. He died about 4 years ago, age 102. That's badass. Old Crow definitely was a bad. Gotta go with the Berserker of Stamford Bridge. A giant Norse axeman who apparently slaughtered about 40 English soldiers and held up their entire army himself, and was only killed when one soldier snuck under the bridge and impaled him, presumably in the groin. I was looking to see if this was here before saying anything. Lapu Lapu. History books often cite Magellan's death with a passing sentence like "died in Southeast Asia while circumnavigating the world," but Filipinos know he was killed in the Philippines by Lapu Lapu in the Battle of Mactan. When Magellan landed in the Philippines, he made a deal with a neighboring king, Humabon, that if Magellan took care of a rival chief on the other side of the island, Humabon would swear fealty to the king of Spain. Magellan had no idea he was being used. Magellan initially offered not to attack Lapu Lapu if he bowed to both Humabon and the King of Spain. Lapu Lapu refused, and Magellan marched over with his heavily armed and armored men and was thoroughly thrashed by hundreds of Filipino warriors with swords. Lapu Lapu is now a national symbol against Western colonization, but I don't think anyone in the US is keen to put him in a textbook. Really. The only mention of the U.S. in the Philippines I got was boiled down to, saved y'all from the Spanish. Conveniently left out Philippine-American War. America allied with the Philippines to drive the Spanish out, and when the Spanish surrendered, the Spanish basically handed then Philippines over to the U.S. as the new colonizers. They then spent 5 more years quashing rebellions of outraged Filipinos. After the war, they introduced the U.S. education system and rewrote the whole history for a new generation. Fun fact: the .45 ACP was invented because Moro tribes in the South kept hacking up American soldiers in the Philippine-American War. They had to invent a whole new bullet with more stopping power because the tribesmen kept charging American soldiers and cutting them down despite being riddled with bullets. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill also went by Jack Churchill, Fighting Jack Churchill, and Mad Jack. This wondrous British officer carried around a longbow and arrow and a Scottish longsword during WW2. To top that all off, he also had some bagpipes. Edit spelling. I watched a video about him. Mad lad went to a German trench with only a sword and all 80 men surrendered, probably thinking he was either a god or they couldn't shoot a guy with those balls of steel. They should make a video game about it. Possibly Balls of War. Leo Major. Canadian hero who liberated an entire Dutch city in WW2 single-handedly. Honestly, Canadians seem all polite, but as soon you in war with them, you dead. On the topic of Canadian soldiers, there's the story of the native Canadian Francis Pega Magabo. He was a sniper in WW1 who was mostly on it for the adrenaline rush. One such way he was known to achieve this adrenaline rush was to sneak into the German trenches in the dead of night, right past the sentries, and walk up to sleeping German soldiers. When he eventually got right next to their sleeping bodies, he would cut medals off their uniforms without waking them and return to his trench. Counting coup. Tommy Fitzpatrick. In 1956, he stole a small plane from New Jersey for a bet and then landed it perfectly on the narrow street in front of the bar he had been drinking at in Manhattan. 2 years later, he did it again after someone did believe he had done it the first time. What's also crazy is that the punishment for the first time ended up being only a $100 fine, since the charges were dropped by the owner of the plane, and the second resulted in only 6 months in jail. Talk about dumb luck. I'd imagine the owner was surprised and impressed. Qing Shishu was a Chinese pirate who led a massive fleet of somewhere between 20,000 to 40,000 men, and ruled over the South China Sea and had influence in all of China's territorial waters. Her fleet stood toe-to-toe with the likes of the British Empire, the Portuguese Empire, and the Qing dynasty. beat me to it. She was awesome. Kapitan Witold Pilecki, a Polish cavalry officer who undertook an insane mission to get himself arrested by the Germans and sent to the concentration camp at Auschwitz. He escaped to tell the world of the horrors, but no one really paid him much attention. This is just the gist of it, but the guy had some other amazing achievements. William Billy Lee. He was George Washington's attendant slave, and as such, he accompanied Washington just about everywhere. As a result, he not only became an accomplished horseman, but he was also in the midst of the fighting throughout the entire Revolutionary War. He was also the only slave of Washington's who was freed immediately when Washington died, and he was given the option of living at Mount Vernon for the rest of his life, which he did. Unfortunately, pretty much everything we know about Billy comes from sources written only by other people who knew him, as he doesn't seem to have left behind any autobiographical data. The saddest part is, despite his valiance as well as being an attendant to someone as iconic as George Washington, him having been enslaved for most of his life is cited as having contributed to the somewhat scarce mention of him in primary sources. I never learned about him in school and didn't hear about Billy at all until I was about 29 or 30, and it's especially disheartening that no writings from his point of view are known to exist. Edit changed a phrase to be more fitting following another Redditor's suggestion. Slave join the cause. I have a feeling he didn't exactly volunteer. An amp, #X200B, yeah, maybe, acted as part of the cause would have been better. I'll change it. Thanks for pointing that out. Teddy Roosevelt grew up with really horrible asthma. Just like me. He's one of my heroes. Compensating for his childhood illnesses was part of why he lived such an active life. Which is exactly why we were so pissed when they made him fat as in Civ 6. The dude was pudgy, yes, but he wasn't fat at all. Leroy Jenkins. Alright. Guns up, let's do this. That Chinese hooker who basically ruled the 7 seas, yar. And GT, Chinese pirate leader who terrorized the China Seas during the Jia-Qing Emperor period of the Qing dynasty in the early 19th century. She commanded over 300 junks manned by 20,000 to 40,000 pirates, men, women, and even children. She entered into conflict with the major nations, such as the British Empire, the Portuguese Empire, and the Qing dynasty. And GT, she is widely considered to be the most successful pirate in history, based on the fact that she commanded the largest crew ever assembled, and that she died in her own bed as a free woman. Emphasis mine. John Paul Jones. I feel like most people would recognize this name from oversimplified videos, but if you don't, he fought in the American Revolution and raided a bunch of cities. He was an absolute legend and helped the Americans a lot. Check out the vid for more details. It was the American Revolution Part 2. Heard he was pretty good at base too. This is just a Sabaton fan hot zone. Two that I haven't seen mentioned here are Larry Thorne or Laurie Torney, a guy who fought in 3 different armies from World War II through to Vietnam, and the soldiers that fought in the Battle of Wisna, one of many battles dubbed Polish Thermopylae, in this instance, because the Polish were outnumbered against the Germans roughly 40-1. Timothy Dexter, he goes from rags to riches just from bad investments and being a general idiot. This video explains why he's such a badass. https://YouTube.b/chsubdu_sbk. Agnodis was a woman living in Athens. She became tired of seeing women dying in childbirth, so she decided to be a doctor. Of course everyone told her no because she was a woman, so she used mad acting skills to disguise herself as a man and enrolled in medical school. A few years later she finished studying and began working as a doctor for pregnant women. All the other doctors became antsy about this new doctor who was doing a better job than they were, and accused Agnodis of sleeping with her patients. At the court, Agnodis stood up on the stadium and dropped her tunic, probably saying something like, "I ain't your wives." The court was of course furious and was going to arrest her when all her previous patients whose lives she saved busted into the courtroom, demanding the charges be dropped. The court couldn't really contend with the angry mob and granted a new law so women could learn to become midwives. There's some speculation as to if the story is real or not, but regardless, she's a queen, and I love the image of her just storming to the center of the courtroom, yanking her tunic off, and shouting, "I am not your wives, you pathetic." Eddie Murphy, a short man from Texas, a man of the wild. thrown into combat where bodies lie piled. Yevno was a socialist Russian revolutionary assassin, who killed Russian ministers in an attempt to bring about a socialist revolution. He consistently pushed for Russian socialists to be more violent and engage in more extreme measures. Yevno became the leader of the Socialist Russian Combat Organization in 1904. He organized assassinations of the Russian Minister of the Interior in 1904, and the Tsar's uncle in 1905. What really makes him a bad was that he was a double agent at the time, and the Minister of the Interior he ordered dead was technically his boss. He was simultaneously the highest-ranked terrorist in Russia and the highest-paid police informant. An AMP #X200B double agent got an MBE, also a Knight's Cross from Germany. An AMP #X200B and GT, after developing a loathing of the regime in Europe during the Pujol, decided to become a spy for the Allies as a way to do something for the good of humanity. Pujol and his wife contacted the British and American intelligence agencies, but each rejected his offer. And GT, undeterred, he created a false identity as a fanatically pro-Spanish government official and successfully became a German agent. He was instructed to travel to Britain and recruit additional agents. Instead, he moved to and created bogus reports about Britain from a variety of public sources, including a tourist guide to Britain, train timetables, cinema newsreels, and magazine advertisements. And GT, although the information would not have withstood close examination, Pujol soon established himself as a trustworthy agent. He began inventing fictitious sub-agents who could be blamed for false information and mistakes. The Allies finally accepted Pujol when the Germans spent considerable resources attempting to hunt down a fictitious convoy. Following interviews by Desmond Bristow of Section VMI-6 Siberian Section 1, Pujol was taken on. The family was moved to Britain and Pujol was given the code name Garbo. Pujol and his handlers spent the rest of the war expanding the fictitious network, communicating to the German handlers at first by letters, and later by radio. Eventually the Germans were funding a network of 27 agents, all fictitious.